begin with the Prime Minister. We'll begin with Boris Johnson. I don't know if you listen to my podcast, full disclosure, but it's one of the loveliest things about it is, well, in fact, the main lovely thing about it is that it gives me a little bit more time and space to talk to people that I normally would have to interview in a sort of 5-minute window on the radio show. And we don't do many interviews on the radio show for that reason. And when we do, we try to break the mould or the model of doing 5 minutes here with the former Director General of the World Trade Organization, and then 5 minutes with Andrea Leadsom, who knows very little about anything but has to be invited onto the programme for, quotes, balance. Just a little throwback to my brief foray at the BBC there. But so yesterday, for example, we got Richard Brooks on from Private Eye and managed to find almost half an hour for him to talk us through the special report he's put together on these dodgy or perceptibly, possibly dodgy. Nothing illegal, nothing criminal, but my goodness me, 30 million quid's worth of commission on a PPE contract that you wouldn't have found out about if Richard Brooks hadn't had the documents leaked to him. It deserved a little bit more space. And yesterday for the podcast, I was with Bill Bailey, a legend of stage and screen, and latterly, of course, Strictly Come Dancing. And he told me a story. Do you know, so relaxed was our encounter, I can't remember whether he told me this on air or off air. Can you? I think it may have been after the cameras had stopped rolling, because we didn't talk about politics in the podcast proper, in the podcast recording. But we were just commenting on Boris Johnson's debacle yesterday at the CBI. And Bill said he'd seen this thing, and it rang a bell with me. He'd seen this thing, and he couldn't remember where it had been. But someone had told a story about being the host of an event at which Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, was due to speak, although this was before he was Prime Minister. And it was one of those absolute sweaty palm moments. And he described this sort of catalogue of chaos and confusion and lack of preparation and turning up at the last minute and being really nervous. And the guy who wrote the piece was saying it was terrible. I was in charge. I thought it was going to be a disaster. And then he walked onto the stage with it. He didn't know what he was doing there or anything like that. And he aced it. They loved it. They lapped it up. And as Bill Bailey was telling me the story yesterday, I heard these bells ringing. These bells ringing, and because what happened 4 years later was that the same guy was in a similar scenario, waiting for the same politician stroke journalist to turn up and deliver a speech to a different audience, and exactly the same thing happened, almost to the letter. And I was racking my brains, and Bill couldn't remember either. It was, believe it or not, it was Jeremy Vine who wrote the article. And I've dug it out, and it is actually incredible. He tells this story often, I think, but he wrote it up back in 2019, just before that Conservative leadership battle came to fruition, and it sort of has. So Johnson turns up and it's Jeremy, where exactly am I? He didn't even know who he was speaking to, and I presume that there would have been a check on this one. It was an awards ceremony at the Hilton on Park Lane. He didn't know what he was doing there. It's the Securitisation Awards, Boris, says Jeremy Vine. Righto, and what is, and who's speaking? You are. And what is securitisation? Oh my God, and everyone's thinking this is going to be awful. This is going to be absolutely awful. And he sits down and he takes his napkin and he borrows a pen and he scribbles down some notes on the back of a napkin. And Jeremy Vine is going, oh my God. Well, I'll tell you what he was doing. He says, I pressed my palms into my trouser legs, ready for catastrophe. And then I noticed he'd accidentally left his page of notes on the table. Could I run up with them? It would be too obvious. It was already at the podium. This was even worse than I imagined. They might have cut out to it early, cut to the awards, skipped the speech. I had 5 minutes of material myself, followed by 18 awards. The script was in my hand. I would need to be ready. Boris had the look of a man who had been dragged out of a well by his ankles. His blonde hair seemed to spring vertically from his head as he embarked on some opener, and then, lo and behold, he absolutely aces it. He brings the house down. He delivers some nonsense about sheep, and pretends not to remember the name of his own uncle, ends up calling her Margaret, talks about why his political hero is the mayor from Jaws, and just sort of runs through a succession, a veritable thesaurus of words like repudiated, forswore, abrogated, all these silly regulations, and they absolutely lapped it up. They lapped it up. And then, remarkably, about 4 years later, Jeremy Vine is in a similar situation, and Boris Johnson turns up late, The organiser is panicking. Do you know where he is? And he comes shambling in 7 or 8 minutes before the actual moment, and he says to Jeremy Vine, Jeremy, what is this? So they told him, and exactly the same thing happened. He got a piece of paper, he borrowed a pen, he wrote on the back of the menu, just like last time, he wrote the word sheep again. He got up onto the stage, he expressed a bit of confusion about what he was doing there and who he was supposed to be. He told exactly the same story about the disposal of a dead sheep on a farm. Then he told the story about the mayor from Jaws. He did exactly the same shtick, and once again they lapped it up. It is a remarkable anecdote, not least because Jeremy Vine is one of those journalists in this country who manages to avoid any accusations of bias, actually, or imbalance. He tells the story very, very straight. And this preceded shortly his elevation to the most important job in the land. And these would be paying audiences. Award ceremonies normally are quite big money spinners, actually. I don't know whether you work this out, but some magazines, I think, would be out of business if it wasn't for their annual award ceremony. You pay for a table and you go up. But anyway, that's a conversation for a different day. And they love it. And they love it for the same reason that many people loved him on Have I Got News For You. They love him for the same reason that people like me, who frankly should have known better, voted for him to be Mayor of London 144 years ago, and quickly, obviously, repudiated, abrogated, rescinded our support. And it works. They love it. And yesterday it went wrong. But it's the same shtick. And I find that absolutely fascinating. It is a question that I have asked you more times than I care to remember, but it's one that came into particularly stark relief yesterday. Did he run out of road yesterday? It's so, you can't ask this question without sounding, I mean, call it smug, condescending, whatever you want to call it, because it is always going to be a variation on a question that looks a lot like, do you realise you were wrong yet? And of course, worse, depending on who's asking the question, which is why I just slipped into the conversation quite casually, that I voted for him myself many moons ago. I hope that insulates me slightly from epic smugness. Do you realise we were right yet about this guy? Do you realise yet that we were right? And that's not a very interesting radio phone-in, and it's a question to which very, very few people will ever answer yes. So let's do it a slightly different way. Let's remind you of Diane Abbott's appearance on this programme and in this studio. We'll do that shortly. And compare it to what happened to the Prime Minister yesterday, and just try to work out why one of them will be haunted by her gaffe for the rest of her life, and one of them will just waltz away into the sunset. And if Jeremy Vine's story is anything to go by, do it again 100 times before he's ready to hang up his headphones. So we'll start with the Prime Minister and two little excerpts from yesterday's catastrophe. Here's the first.
With fantastic broadband, forgive me. Forgive me. Forgive me. People will have the confidence to stay nearer the place they grew up.
And here is another.
Yesterday I went, as we all must, to Peppa Pig World. I don't know if you've been to Peppa Pig World. Hands up anyone who's been to Peppa Pig World? Not enough. I was a bit hazy what I would find at Peppa Pig World, but I loved it. And Peppa Pig World is very much my kind of place. It has very safe streets, discipline in schools, heavy emphasis on new mass transit systems. I notice, even if they're a bit stereotypical about Daddy Pig.
I don't know. I'll play you the Diane Abbott clip after the break, but actually listening to that, do we need a comparison? Or do we just ask, what did you make of that yesterday? I'd have a tendency, particularly earlier in the week, to overthink things, as you know. And I hate the way Diane Abbott was treated. Not a fan of her performance as Shadow Home Secretary, but a huge admirer of her whole career, and the abuse and the racist vitriol that she endures probably eclipses anybody else in the country, because, of course, she's black and a woman. So she gets the misogyny and the racism. But it's a bit obvious, isn't it, really, why people would be queuing up to attack her for a relatively minor gaffe while they're giving Boris Johnson a free pass on a relatively major, multiple gaffe? I don't know. I'll probably play you the clip in the next bit of the programme. But the question, do you know what? Let's not overthink it. How do you respond to that? Particularly if you are, like me, somebody who did fall for it at some point in your life. 0345 6060 973. And you've been asleep for 10 years. You woke up in the United Kingdom. Last thing you remember, give or take, was the Olympics opening ceremony. Happy, happy days. You wake up now, and this bloke is not only a Prime Minister, but he's doing that in public. No one's that surprised. What is he? I mean, that's what he does. He's in charge of. If we go to war, he's in charge. If there is a decision to be made about the deployment of Trident, of nuclear missiles, he's in charge. If we have one of the most damaging, self-inflicted policies ever undertaken voluntarily by a nation state, for example, Brexit, he's in charge. And then you listen to that, and you have in one ear, you have gobs on sticks like me who've been telling you for years what he's made of, what he's about, what he does. And not just me, but his former employers and his former aide, Dominic Cummings. They're all telling you what he's really like, what a catastrophic period in British history it will be as long as he is in charge. And that on a day like yesterday, how do you keep the ship afloat? How do you laugh that one off? The CBI. I suppose you could slag off the CBI. Would that work? The Daily Mail tried today. They're attacking the leader of the CBI for suggesting that Margaret Thatcher betrayed the industrialised North during the 1980s. You can tell the Daily Mail's under new, or indeed under old management, can't you? But you just tell me what goes through your head when you listen to it. 0345 6060 973. Is the number that you need. And don't forget Theresa May's conference speech, which wasn't her fault. She had a cough, and then things started falling off the set behind her. Again, he's got this Teflon reputation, but if you subscribe to it, how do you process events like that? I don't listen, dead cats are a thing, clearly, but there's no way, Nick in Oxford and others, that Johnson deliberately fluffed it up in that way yesterday. It's the length of time that passes. So we have something here. Oh, I'm in one of those moods, Keith. I'm not. The switchboard's groaning under the weight of all the people ringing in, and I've got no compulsion to take any calls yet. Shall I just wind my neck in and take some calls? All right, but remind me, I want to talk about the emergency tape, all right, and why that is the reason why we know that Johnson was not deliberately being rubbish yesterday in the hope of distracting attention from other issues. Don't let me forget that. 22 minutes after 10. Ben's in Alicante. Ben, what would you like to say?
Morning.
Right,
I'd just like to say that I think it's illustrative of the guy's can't be bothered attitude. This is the same bloke that apparently didn't know what the customs union was after he took us out of the customs union.
Yes.
That's
according to... that is according to that well-known lefty anti-Boris Johnson, anti-Brexit commie Dominic Cummings, isn't it? Or Dominic Commings, as we should perhaps start calling him because of his massive left-wing leanings. Yes, and you're right. He has revealed or claimed that. I don't know if he's proved it.
Mm-hmm. And I find that, like you, I actually, although I never voted for him, because I'm originally from South London, although I never voted for him for the mayoral thing, I did actually think he was a kind of appealing character. He did look to me to be a sort of... a kind of quite sort of cosmopolitan-minded, and
well, he was. I mean, there was going to be an amnesty on immigration, I think, when I put my cross in his box. But exactly. The world turns, doesn't it? And he's very much an opportunist. But you're not telling it. I mean, again, I don't want to do too much speculation about what people who don't think what we think. But if you were a fan and you watched that yesterday, Tory MPs are a bit different because they're only going to turn on him when he thinks that he's going to lose them their seats. So as long as enough people are tugging their forelocks and falling for it. But how do you come off the back of yesterday without thinking what you think? Because you thought that before yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, yeah. I'd come to that conclusion quite some time ago, rather like yourself. I don't know. I mean, I would say. I mean, I've got mates that think he's wonderful.
Still, we haven't caught up with them yet.
But I don't know what they're making of it this morning. I mean, it was a shocking exhibition.
Yes.
I mean, I actually thought, when I was listening to it yesterday, I was listening to your show yesterday, and obviously you played the clip.
Very
wise. And I thought there was something wrong with the radio.
Yeah, a lot of people did. That's why I was going to mention the emergency tape, actually, because it went on for so long. And normally there'd be that little pause, or there'd be that... I interviewed Rory Stewart, oddly enough, because, of course, he was one of the candidates in that leadership battle as well. And I asked him whether he thought... I think it was whether or not he thought Johnson was dangerous. And he paused for so long before he answered the question. That's the last time I can remember, and it wasn't on the radio, it was on the podcast, so there's no emergency tape anyway, and I was sitting in the room with him, so I knew that he hadn't sort of fainted or the signal had gone down or something like that. But other people who've listened back to the podcast mentioned that pause was so long, they thought that their phone had run out of power, and that one is similar. If it wasn't for him mumbling under his breath, forgive me, then our emergency tape would have kicked in, and you would have heard Steve Allen talking about mince pies. And that is the kick-up. That's the kick-up, the 30 seconds or whatever it was. Ben, thank you. Stephen is in Leicester. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello,
I
Stephen.
think the biggest problem is that this is an example of him not demonstrating leadership qualities, just not being able to...
People like that, though, Stephen, don't they? I guess that's what we need today. People who like it still or did like it and don't like it anymore, because you're not going to win any prizes for pointing out a lack of clarity and leadership from the king of the lack of clarity and leadership.
Yes, but I think people should understand that there's something better out there as well, in terms of someone who can understand a message, deliver that in a professional manner, and then prepare a clear strategic mindset towards his audience, in this particular occasion, the CBI.
And Keir Starmer did a good speech. The Times are speaking very warmly about him. The lad in Oxford who I mildly admonished a moment ago suggests that this is mission accomplished for Boris Johnson, because we're talking about how awful he is instead of how quietly competent Keir Starmer was yesterday. But I think that's man bites dog versus dog bites man. Prime Minister fluffing up on that scale, even this Prime Minister, is man bites dog territory. Leader of the opposition delivering a competent speech is dog bites man territory, isn't it, really?
I do agree with that, and it makes me sad to think that we focus on the negative instead of praising when someone does a professional job, such as what Keir Starmer did yesterday.
Does it? I mean, it's a bit naive of you to think that you're going to talk about a completely unremarkable, competent speech instead. I mean, it's a bit like saying, why are we all talking about that massive car crash instead of about that car that just drove past just under the speed limit doing absolutely nothing wrong?
Yeah, I totally get it, but I also think that...
it is. No, of course it's dispiriting, but it's human nature. It ain't ever going to change. And that's why I'm so fascinated by the people who think that the car crash is good, or the car... Oh, I love that guy. He's great, isn't he? He's crashed the car again. I love that guy. And in fact, not only do I love the guy who keeps crashing the car, I can't wait to get in the back seat with him, with my family, and see where he's going to drive, see what he's going to drive us into next, off a cliff, into a brick wall. Oh, who knows? Michael's in Sweden. It's a very international show. You don't count, to my listening figures in Alicante or Stockholm or wherever you are. I'm delighted that you're ringing in, but you don't have a radar diary. What would you like to say, Michael?
Well, I thought I was listening to a spoof yesterday.
Yes.
But for the very first time in my life, I actually felt sorry for Boris Johnson.
Oh.
You've done public speaking, obviously, and guests and what have you. And when things go completely and utterly wrong like that, and
they never go that wrong. They never go that wrong.
Well done, you. Yeah.
No, but they don't, do they? Worst thing that ever happened to me, 15, 16 years old, Leeds City Hall, and I'd won with the speech that I had, and like an idiot, I'd added some extra paragraphs to the speech that I won with on the way up to Leeds, and I ran out of time. The red lights go on and I start reading it like Theo Usherwood does when he comes into the studio, and I say, Theo, make this one a bit quick. And instead of using fewer words, he uses the same amount of words but speaks really quickly. But I still, got it all out. I got penalised for going over the time limit, but I didn't, to stumble like that when that's supposed to be the thing that you're good at.
Don't mistake me. That's the first time I've ever... I mean, my biggest resentment of Boris Johnson is that he didn't deliver on his promise to die in a ditch. But that's another matter.
Or to lie down in front of a...
exactly.
And these are, of course, figures of speech, and you are, of course, being light-hearted, but for anyone who wants to pretend otherwise.
Maybe.
Yes.
But last night on BBC Radio 4 Extra, they on Monday nights they run the Ronnie Barker series, Lines from My Grandfather's Forehead, and the opening segment of Ronnie Barker last night, and I thought I was listening to Boris Johnson.
Because it was bumbling.
It was flip-flop, back, forth, this, that, just like, what's his name from Little Britain doing the spoof about go to work, don't go to work.
Yeah, Matt Lucas.
Get up.
I mean, that's the line between satire and reality, isn't it? Matt could almost have been just putting a slightly comical voice on words that had actually been uttered by the Prime Minister. But do you think it snaps for anybody? I don't know if anyone's rung me yet for whom the scales fell from their eyes yesterday. It makes you wonder whether or not he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote, doesn't it?
Yes, and you picked somebody's quote the other week, which I've been enjoying as well, and it's the cat fits, doff it. And one thing about the Brits is we love a toff.
We do. He's not even a proper toff.
Not
that would make it any better. Not that would make him and Rees-Mogg went to toff school. They weren't born toffs.
That brings me to another point, and I have this theory that in a truly open democracy and a truly open society, bribery and corruption is open to everybody. You know who you've got to slip a fiver to, or a brown envelope, whether it's the local mayor or the chief of whoever it is. But in Britain, it's not. Bribery and corruption is restricted to the few.
Well, yes, corruption, I think you can use the word corruption without running the risk. If I were to now name people, or you were, you would not necessarily be running the risk of libelling anybody. A perception of corruption, certainly what Owen Paterson did was corruption, and he was found to be so by the Standards Commissioner. But I think you're right. But I prefer cronyism because it is a little bit more legally insulated. But if you are a prominent Conservative donor and you did help a subsidiary company of your own firm to secure £50 million worth of PPE contracts, then you are susceptible to the accusation of cronyism. And Lord Chadlington, who's 79, has given nearly £100,000 to the Tory party over 20 years. He also helped David Cameron to get elected to the safe seat of Witney in 2001 and was president of the former Prime Minister's local party association. And he helped a subsidiary company of his own firm to secure £50 million of PPE contracts. The point that Michael makes is that you and I probably couldn't have done that. We wouldn't have known who to call or what to say. And that is the difference in his reading between an open society and Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. James, please stop playing the Boris Johnson speech thing. As someone who has to do presentations and who suffers from paralysing stage fright, I'm finding it horrifying to keep listening to, even if it couldn't have happened to a bigger plonker. That's a nice bit of only fools and horses ease crept in at the end. Matt in North Wales says, it seems to me that he's looking for the he's trying his best, bless his bumbling cotton socks reaction from the public. Again, now that the political ship is sinking fast, unfortunately for him, the public are not finding the joke funny anymore, to quote a famous radio show host. And dear Mr. O'Brien, says Graham, that last from Matt, if you watch Back to the Future, you'll see Doc Brown's disbelief that Ronald Reagan is president of the United States of America. Finding that Boris Johnson is currently in charge is just a continuation of that. I've got a couple of phone lines free now. I would love you to call me if you are having buyer's remorse. A phrase that has also appeared in the context of a Boris Johnson story in the last few days, but it's a story that's so unpleasant that I have chosen not to actually share the details with you, even though Downing Street have rescinded a threat to sue the New European newspaper after they published that story. But I think because of the nature of the identity of the other people involved in that story, I'm not going to give you the details. But if you are having buyer's remorse with regard to Boris, I guess what I'm asking is, how could you watch yesterday's speech or even listen to yesterday's speech, which I think is worse than watching it, because if you listen to it, the idea that it was just a sort of temporary aberration or something like that is it's impossible to sustain unless you are approaching cult status, I think. How could you witness yesterday's speech and not have at least a modicum of buyer's remorse? What do you have to do to yourself witnessing that speech to persuade yourself that everything's hunky-dory? Can I give you two theories that you might not like? Okay. And one of them is a bit uncomfortable for me, actually. But the first is that he embodies Brexit. And a lot of people now might be waking up to the reality of Boris Johnson, but they're not yet ready to admit the reality of Brexit. Nick took a few phone calls earlier on LBC about Nigel Farage's grimly predictable flirtation with returning to politics. Imagine that. Imagine being a man arguably more associated than most with the idea that Brexit would be good for Britain, and if you're a bit of a racist, it would keep refugees out. And then, because it's done none of those things and has actually made everything worse, Farage thinks it's time for a comeback. I mean, you can't even begin to unravel that level of absurdity, can you? But there is a kind of... I don't know. I'd vote for him, whatever, because if people endorse your prejudices, you will forgive them anything at all, as Donald Trump perfectly distilled when he talked about shooting someone on Fifth Avenue and not losing a single vote. But when it comes to this buyer's remorse question, I think part of it, 50% of it is Brexit. Let's say 52% of it is Brexit, okay? And if you admit that Johnson is a complete clown, then you're going to have to admit that thing you bought off him, you probably should have kept a receipt. Is that fair comment? I don't know. Tell me why that's not fair at all. I don't know if today's the day to take calls from people claiming that Brexit's going brilliantly because, I don't know, Shell or something. But the idea that isn't, I'm not describing you, but that's 52% of it. And I hope this doesn't sound too conceited, but I think the 48% of it, the other 48% of why people can't admit to buyer's remorse yet, and I'm not talking about the vote and the choice that you had in December of 2019, because that was Sophie's choice. You know, that was an appalling dichotomy of candidate. But I'm talking instead about the belief that he was great. That's the buyer's remorse. I voted very reluctantly for what I thought would be the least bad of two appalling options. And you still may be able to sustain that belief. I'm talking about the people who were like, yay, come on, I'll have a bit of that. That buyer's remorse. 52% Boris and Brexit have become inextricable, and you can't disown one without disowning the other. And the other bit is, I think it's the people who told you what he was like. And the idea of having to tell them that they were right and you were wrong is psychologically repulsive. You know? Just look at social media. The idea, and you get this with any politician who achieves almost cultish status. If the predictions and the analyses of the people that you spent years hating turn out to be correct, oddly and illogically, the response for many people is to hate them even more. So you can't even contemplate yet admitting that Johnson was all of the things his critics said he was and none of the things that you said he was, because it'd be like an anxiety dream. It'd be like waking up naked in a job interview. It would just be so cringingly awful to go, oh my God, that O'Brien bloke was right. I hate it. And if it's any consolation, a lot of Jeremy Corbyn fans feel the same way about me. So, you know, you could start a mutual support group or something like that. That might be quite a good idea. Keith would be probably the honorary president or something like that. But at some point, and we're talking about Johnson now, not the other fella, at some point, you'd have a kind of, well, I'm just going to use the word buyer's remorse because I like the phrase buyer's remorse because I kind of like it. But you can't do that yet because you spent so long shouting about how brilliant and shiny this thing that you were going to buy was. 10:41 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 10:41 is the time. And Bar is in Alston in Cumbria. Bar, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Bar.
I think the people who bought him have no remorse at all, because the people who bought him and put him in power knew exactly what he was.
Yeah, but not the voters. Not
the voters. No, he is a walking, talking distraction bomb. He is the living embodiment of today is a good day to bury bad news. So today, while they're plotting to remove your daughter's right to anything other than primary care, they're trying to demolish the NHS, they send out their Boris bomb, and everybody's talking about Peppa the Pig.
It's Peppa Pig, not Peppa the Pig. Just to,
Sorry,
no, that's quite all right. But this isn't true today. The social care bill that went through yesterday, some of the NHS legislation, but we wouldn't all be talking about that. But we wouldn't
all. You're letting him yank your chain.
No, but the problem with the theory is, and I'm happy to have a friendly ding dong about this, is that yesterday's speech was not deliberate.
Are you sure about that?
When was the last time you heard him say the words "forgive me" 3 times under his breath?
But that's just that's what you call it, a minimal interjection. It's just a way of filling space.
So when's the last time? No, yesterday's speech was an absolute disaster. Do you know what happened yesterday?
But no, it isn't, 'cause it's not a disaster.
Let me just finish, and then I'll.
No,
of course, but that's why this is such. Forgive me, Bar. This is why this is such lazy analysis. If there is a dead cat in front of me, I will point at the dead cat. And some cats die by accident; they're not actually killed by the person who then throws them into the middle of the table. And we will talk about some of the NHS issues.
Promise me.
Well, of course we will, but you won't phone me.
I think
hoist by your own petard, Bar.
Because I think so much of you, and I expect you to be on top of this, and it bothers me when it feels like you're being steamrolled.
I promise you I'm not.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, of course I do, and I'm conscious of it. But that's why I'm talking about dog bites man and man bites dog territory.
Yeah,
This question yesterday. There's 3 reasons why you can identify it was not deliberate. One is the sheer length of the pause. I mean, that's why I mentioned emergency tapes. If we both go silent now, is it 20 seconds, Keith?
Yeah.
For about 20 seconds, you get an emergency tape kick in, and Steve Allen will be singing about mince pies. So that is not deliberate. The second, I'm not going to remember what the third is, so I'll get the second one out quickly. Downing Street briefed against Downing Street yesterday. Political editor of the BBC quoted a Downing Street source describing this as disastrous.
But I think I'm a level different from you in that the whole thing is still great distraction from what else they're getting up to.
Yeah, but then you become the distraction from what else they're getting up to, because the sheer incompetence and unsuitability of this man for the highest office in the land is something that we should be talking about. And you're on the radio saying, "Oh no, we shouldn't be talking about the sheer unsuitability of this man for the highest office in the land."
Who put that in because they knew it would work for them.
Well, we've done that, and yesterday we talked at length about social care and why it was so unfair. But I think you're actually becoming what you describe. Yes.
Yeah, got you. Yeah.
You see what I mean? Don't talk about how awful Boris Johnson is. Talk about something that's a bit more complicated, and we can probably pin it on the Health Secretary or Priti Patel instead, and he'll just be good old bumbling.
Exactly.
You see?
Yeah. Got you.
But I don't know. We'll see. 52:48. Thank you, Bar. Same to you. 10:45 is the time. 03456060973. I'm not going to stop asking because I respect you so much, and this is a safe space for when you're ready to admit to buyer's remorse. But if you want to ring in and tell me why you won't, that's fine as well. How bad would it have to be? A speech to the CBI, not a speech to the Association of Radiator Fitters, which if he had turned up ill-prepared and lost his thread would be forgivable. This is a speech to business. This is a speech to the most powerful business organisation in the country. And they really need a little bit of help at the moment because of all the problems facing the country. And you can carve it up however you like. But let's just say, in no particular order, COVID and Brexit. And he's in charge. He is the figurehead. He's the pinnacle of the pyramid. And this was his opportunity to, whip up some warmth and some enthusiasm and some, whatever you want to call it, chutzpah. And he blew it. He could not have blown it more spectacularly. And yet here you are, not worried about it. Not what? No, it's fine. It's great. It's doing his best. I almost envy it. I'd just like to know what it feels like. Dear at Mr. James O.B. on at LBC, I'm a big fan, but please, please, please stop using the Hebrew word chutzpah when you mean the Yiddish word. I'm not going to read that out, the next bit, just in case you've done a cheeky one, when I will then say something that I don't know the meaning of, but is not what I... Do you see what I mean? Just a little bit of a cheeky one. It works on the radio. There are some famous examples of it. The producers here at LBC like nothing better than to keep a tape of presenters falling into some of the traps set by texts. But I will do a little research before I take your comments to heart. But thank you for them. 10:50 is the time. Okay, I don't know the answer to this question. I think I do. If Tim Cook at Apple or Elon Musk at Tesla or Jeff Bezos at Amazon, who are business leaders perceived very much as being, I guess Steve Jobs more so even than Tim Cook, but they are business leaders perceived very much as having their hand on the tiller of massive, massive businesses, respectively Apple, Tesla, Amazon. If you're, in this field, I wonder whether you could tell me, if they did that, if they stood up in front of an AGM, for example, or an important audience, and fluffed things that spectacularly, would you expect to see an immediate impact on the share price? Because I presume that for many observers, Boris Johnson yesterday took a pair of scissors to UK PLC. Bearing in mind this was the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry. And he couldn't even be bothered to show them the respect of a half-decent, pre-prepared speech read out competently in front of the world's television cameras. So it's a genuine question. I don't think you'll get through on the phone. So text me if you can on 84850 or tweet at Mr. James OB. Would that drive a coach and horses through the share price if it was a CEO of a massive company standing up in front of the world's cameras and doing that? I think it would, but as I say, I don't know for sure. Ian's in Bristol. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, hey, James. Actually, it did, didn't it? Tesla, Elon Musk, they suspend him from using his Twitter account. The board.
I think you're right. Actually, it's not my field of expertise, but that it's slightly different. I mean, I'd like a specific, because that he would say he'd done it deliberately, and he's a rebel, and he's a radical, and he's a maverick. Whereas this was just someone having an absolute nightmare on the world.
Having a shocker, absolutely.
Having a shocker, Barry.
yeah, 100%. And I mean, I've got a bit of. I voted for Boris, and also I voted for Brexit. I put my hands up, and on reflection, the way things are panning out at the moment, I thought there might have been a bit of a plan in place. So I do have a bit of remorse in voting for him. And would I vote differently, in hindsight? Very possibly.
Talk to me about yesterday's speech, because there's no point me getting angry with you and saying, what was wrong with you? Why couldn't you see it? It was as plain as the nose on your face. And I think that's more about Brexit for me than it would be about the last general election. But when you watch yesterday's speech, and the country is divided into people who are supremely unsurprised by incontrovertible evidence of what they have always known he is, and then there's you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yesterday was, as you say, he just completely hit the self-destruct button and destroyed himself. And I think any credibility, everyone knows that he was he's a bit of a bungling buffoon, in, I think, his own words, aren't they? And you've got a situation where he's standing up in front of the leaders of all of these businesses and the very cogs of the UK's economy, and just making himself look like a complete idiot. Yes. And I think that's, in the nicest possible way, that's exactly what he did. He showed a complete lack of disrespect. I've worked for many companies, and at a very, very senior level, the executive directors and that, when they stand up and they give these inspiring speeches, which is what I should have been. It was a call to arms. It was a rallying, pep talk, wasn't it, for the industry? Yeah. And he just completely failed on every part. He's no Maximus Aurelius, is he? And,
no, he's not. He's no Logan Roy either, is he? As a few people are drawing succession parallels with this to remind me that CEOs going to pieces can definitely impact share prices. Why then? Where does the free pass come from? Do you think? If I mean, you're teetering. You're still with love and respect here, and you're still kidding yourself if you think things could have gone better. And I respect that at the time.
It was more hope than anything.
Fair enough. Time will tell. But you still.
Why was I teetering? It was really. It's really. I don't think I am teetering. The problem that we've got, James, is if he was a CEO of a company, not only would it affect the share price, but he would be hauled in front of the board of directors, and they would be questioning his viability for that position. Having brought the company and affected the company's image on a public platform. Yeah. What you've got is a situation where these guys are untouchable, and for every 4 years, really, there's nothing you or I can do about it, and that is where it's broken.
I take your analogy, and I'll run with it a little bit. There is one circumstance in which the board wouldn't do that to him, and that is if the company was manufacturing snake oil. I mean, it's fine. It's polite of you to snigger, but it's not meant to be a joke, because that's what breaks my heart, and as someone who perhaps saw it on the horizon, I'm not surprised to see it happening because it's infecting the whole country now. It started off with Vote Leave and then it became the Conservative Party and now it's the whole UK. The snake oil, which with respect you bought 2 doses of, is what we do now. It's what the CEO is best at. And so the board aren't going to haul him in for a disciplinary while the country is still buying snake oil on an industrial scale, you see?
Yeah, just to clear up why I voted for him, because it was purely because I looked at all of the people that were up for it, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't like any of them, and I genuinely this is how pathetic voting is in our country now. The way I see it, I went for the guy that made me laugh the most, and that is it.
No, well,
honestly,
so did I. Back in my London mayoral days, when I probably did go down a similar route to you. Lots of people do, and it's important to remember that. You want to live in a country where it doesn't matter that much because there is a sort of broad consensus, as there was for much of the post-war period. You could probably describe the Blair to Cameron. Well, no, you probably couldn't actually because of austerity. But if it wasn't for austerity, I don't know that would have been massively different regimes, but probably a little bit more palm greasing for the donors under Cameron, but commitments to education, if it wasn't for the global financial crisis, they probably would have carried on spending. I don't know. Don't hold me to that one. Ian, thank you. Christina's in Chelsea. Christina, what would you like to say?
Well, James, I'm surprised that you're surprised.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that you're surprised that I'm surprised. That you're surprised.
I think the country just doesn't care anymore.
Right.
Because if you think about what we've all been through over the last 18 months, a few years, and I think people are seriously getting their heads down and getting on with their own lives, and until something huge changes. And for me, I think one of the big things I would like to answer is, what happened with the editor of the Daily Mail? Why was the other one dispatched with? Because
there are various theories
starting to move, and if that had been allowed to continue, I think we might have started to see the shutters, the blinkers come off. I really do.
Well, for people who don't follow such things, the former editor, Geordie Greig, who was relieved of his duties last week, he led the line on the criticism of Owen Paterson. So you can join the dots and think that spooked the owner, and therefore they've replaced Greig with a Paul Dacre disciple, and they've brought Paul Dacre back in as a sort of editor-in-chief role. That was also announced yesterday. I don't know if that's true. Obviously, I still have a lot of friends and contacts on Fleet Street, and it may have more to do with a change of personnel above that level, and the bloke who turned Mail Online into, for good or for ill, Christina, there's no denying that it is a huge behemoth of media internationally, and he has now sort of assumed a very, very senior position, and so there is another slightly less excitable argument that it's all about business and nothing to do with politics. But I'd be surprised if it were that simple. It's amazing that they landed some very, very serious punches upon a deeply flawed administration, and then the editor got handed his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap.
Yeah, what a coincidence.
What a coincidence indeed. And I did tell people at the time to be grateful for the progress that the title was making under the last editor, even if it was, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Christina, thank you. I misunderstood you originally, of course. You're saying, I don't know how you can be surprised that people are letting it pass, that people are cool with it. Well, I don't know if they are. I think there must be a it's stages, isn't it? I wonder how long it takes to bubble to the surface. Ian, who obviously has felt it rising and articulated it, a degree of buyer's remorse. Not so much for the general election in 2019. I think that was almost a knock-on effect from what happened in 2016. But the idea that this bloke could deliver something brilliant, if you're still holding on to that, well, I've got a bridge you might like to buy.